Atlanta Hawks, late 2000s to early 2000s. The Hawks of this era became the definition of NBA mediocrity. They weren't terrible, but they also weren't contenders. Despite having solid players like Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, and Al Horford, the team constantly ran into brick walls in the playoffs, usually against Boston or Orlando. Ownership issues and a lack of true star power left them stuck in the middle, too good to tank but nowhere near championship level. Fans grew frustrated watching a team with talent but no real direction, and Atlanta struggled to build an identity until they reshaped the roster in the mid-2000s. Boston Celtics, 1993 to 2007. After the glory days of Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish, Boston entered its darkest stretch. The tragic deaths of Len Bias and Reggie Lewis robbed the Celtics of their future, leaving the franchise in turmoil. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, the Celtics became irrelevant, cycling through coaches and front offices while piling up losing seasons. The once proud dynasty, known for banners and legends, had nothing to show for over a decade. It wasn't until Danny Ainge's blockbuster trades for Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen in 2007 that the Celtics returned to the championship picture. Brooklyn Nets, 2009 to 2016. The Nets' darkest era came after the infamous trade for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce in 2013. The move was supposed to push them into title contention, but instead it destroyed their future. Boston fleeced Brooklyn, taking multiple first-round picks that became Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, while the Nets sank into irrelevance. With no draft picks, bloated contracts, and an aging roster, Brooklyn had one of the bleakest outlooks in the league. From 2009 to 2016, the team struggled with poor attendance, lack of identity, and ownership chaos, before eventually rebuilding with stars like Durant, Irving, and Harden. Charlotte Hornets, Bobcats, 2011 to 2012. The Charlotte Bobcats' 2011-12 season is infamous in NBA history. The team finished with a 7-59 record, the worst winning percentage ever, .106. Fans were left embarrassed as the franchise became a punchline, with unwatchable basketball and very little talent. Even Michael Jordan's ownership couldn't shield them from criticism. Key players like Kemba Walker were too young to carry the load, and the roster was filled with fringe NBA players. This era showed just how low an NBA team could sink. It took years of rebranding, drafting, and slow progress before Charlotte began to claw its way back to respectability. Chicago Bulls, post-Jordan, 1999 to 2004. After Michael Jordan retired for the second time in 1998, the Bulls completely collapsed. The dynasty was dismantled, with Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and coach Phil Jackson all gone. What followed was one of the ugliest rebuilds in NBA history. The Baby Bulls, featuring young players like Elton Brand, Ron Artest, and Tyson Chandler, never lived up to the hype. Chicago became a lottery team, far from its championship pedigree. United Center crowds that once roared for Jordan were now watching a team that couldn't even sniff the playoffs. Not until the mid-2000s did the Bulls find stability again. Cleveland Cavaliers, 2010 to 2014. After LeBron James left for Miami in 2010, the Cavaliers entered one of the darkest periods in franchise history. Cleveland went from a finals contender to a lottery team almost overnight. They posted multiple seasons with fewer than 20 wins, including a 19-win campaign in 2010 to 11. Young prospects like Kyrie Irving and Tristan Thompson showed promise, but there was no veteran leadership or cohesion. Front office missteps, poor drafting, and constant roster turnover left fans frustrated. This era was defined by disappointment and the absence of hope. LeBron's return in 2014 finally ended the Cavaliers' dark age. Detroit Pistons, 2009 to 2020, post Bad Boys and championship glory, the Pistons entered a long, dark rebuild. Between 2009 and 2020, Detroit cycled through coaches, draft picks, and failed veterans with little success. Teams often finished near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, missing the playoffs repeatedly. The once dominant defensive identity vanished, leaving a roster without stars or consistency. The constant front office changes and poor trades only added to instability. Despite occasional bright spots like Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin, the franchise struggled to regain its competitive edge. This era is remembered as a prolonged period of irrelevance in a city once obsessed with basketball. Indiana Pacers. The Pacers' darkest period came after the infamous Malice at the Palace in 2004. The brawl against the Detroit Pistons resulted in suspensions, lost games, and tarnished reputations for players like Ron Artest, Steven Jackson, and Jermaine O'Neal. Indiana struggled to recover on the court and off it, losing cohesion and credibility. The team fell into mediocrity, missing the playoffs several times and failing to develop a clear identity. Even after artists left, the franchise had difficulty rebuilding a competitive squad. The Malice era left a long-lasting scar, both financially and culturally, making it one of the franchise's lowest points. Miami Heat, 2007 to 2008. Before the Big Three era, the Miami Heat hit a low point in 2007 to 2008, only 2 years removed from their 2006 championship. Dwayne Wade suffered injuries, and the team limped to a 15 to 67 record, the worst in franchise history. Shaquille O'Neal was past his prime, and the supporting cast lacked talent or experience. Pat Riley struggled to find direction, and the franchise became a laughingstock in the Eastern Conference. This short but brutal stretch showed how quickly a championship team could collapse due to injuries, poor roster construction, and lack of depth. Milwaukee Bucks, 1990s to 2000s. After their late 80s playoff success, the Bucks descended into irrelevance in the 1990s and 2000s. With no stable star, poor drafting, and low attendance, Milwaukee became a perennial lottery team. The team lacked identity, alternating between rebuilding and mediocre veteran pickups. Even promising young players failed to flourish due to poor management and inconsistent coaching. Fans grew frustrated with losing records and a lack of playoff appearances. It wasn't until the arrival of Giannis Antetokounmpo in 2013 that the Bucks finally reversed course. This era remains a cautionary tale for small market franchises without vision. New York Knicks, 2001 to 2013. After the Patrick Ewing era ended, the Knicks entered a nightmare run under Isaiah Thomas. From 2001 to 2013, the franchise was defined by poor drafts, bad trades, and front office incompetence. Expensive free agents flopped, coaches were fired mid-season, and young talent like Stephon Marbury failed to gel. The team missed the playoffs for multiple years and became the NBA's joke franchise. Fans endured losing seasons and embarrassing collapses, with Madison Square Garden crowds growing restless. The Knicks only regained competitiveness after Phil Jackson and later Masai Ujiri's involvement, but this 12-year stretch remains one of the darkest periods in NBA history. Orlando Magic, post-Dwight Howard, 2012 to 2019. After Dwight Howard left for the Lakers in 2012, the Magic entered a cycle of failed rebuilds. Orlando lacked a franchise star to compete, making them a lottery-bound team for several seasons. Young prospects struggled, coaching changes were constant, and the team had no identity. Free agent signings rarely worked out, and the franchise lost credibility in the Eastern Conference. Despite drafting promising players like Jonathan Isaac and Markelle Fultz, injuries and mismanagement kept the team in the basement. This era is remembered as one of the longest post-star rebuilding periods in NBA history. Philadelphia 76ers, 2013 to 2016. The process era was intentional tanking taken to an extreme. Led by Sam Hinkie, the 76ers prioritized draft picks over wins, culminating in a 10-win season in 2013 to 14. Fans endured years of losing streaks, poor morale, and brutal basketball. Even top draft picks like Nerlens Noel struggled to make an immediate impact. While the strategy eventually yielded stars like Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, the dark years tested the patience of fans and players alike. This era redefined losing in the NBA, showing how a team could intentionally build through failure while risking public outrage. Toronto Raptors, early 2000s, post-Vince Carter. After Vince Carter left in 2004, the Raptors fell into a long stretch of irrelevance. The team lacked star power and suffered through inconsistent drafts and coaching changes. Attendance dropped, fan interest waned, and Toronto became a frequent lottery team. Young players like Chris Bosh briefly offered hope, but the team failed to make deep playoff runs. It wasn't until the DeRozan and Lowry era that the Raptors regained relevance, eventually culminating in a championship in 2019. The post-Carter years remain the franchise's darkest era, a time of disappointment and stagnation. Washington Wizards. The Wizards' darkest stretch came in the 2000s, highlighted by the Gilbert Arenas locker room gun incident. Teams frequently failed to make the playoffs, with inconsistent rosters and declining fan engagement. Despite brief periods with stars like Anton Jameson and Karen Butler, the franchise lacked cohesion. Arenas' suspension and subsequent decline symbolized the instability of the era. Washington became known for drama over basketball, with ownership issues and coaching changes compounding the problem. It took rebuilding through the Wall-Beal era to restore credibility, but the 2000s remain a cautionary tale of talent wasted and mismanagement. Dallas Mavericks, 1988 to 1998. Before Dirk Nowitzki arrived, the Mavericks were mired in one of the NBA's ugliest decades. After 1988, the team struggled with losing seasons, poor draft choices, and a revolving door of coaches. Talented players like Derek Harper or Sam Perkins were never enough to lift the franchise, and ownership instability added to the chaos. Dallas became a symbol of mediocrity, with fans growing frustrated at the lack of direction. It wasn't until the late 1990s and the acquisition of young stars that the Mavericks rebuilt a competitive foundation, eventually leading to their 2011 championship. Denver Nuggets, 1990s. The Denver Nuggets in the 1990s were a classic lottery team. After their strong 1980s foundation, Denver struggled to develop stars and lost consistently. The 1997-98 season was particularly horrific, as they posted just 11 wins. Poor management and lack of coaching stability prevented progress. Even when drafting players like Antonio McDyess or LaFonso Ellis, injuries and trades hindered continuity. The Nuggets became a team fans dreaded watching, often finishing near the bottom of the Western Conference. Their struggles lasted until the Carmelo Anthony era in the early 2000s, which brought playoff relevance back to Denver. Golden State Warriors, 1995 to 2012. Before their dynasty of the 2000s, the Warriors spent nearly 2 decades in irrelevance. From 1995 to 2012, the franchise cycled through bad drafts, coaching changes, and low attendance. Star power was scarce. Even Chris Mullin's presence couldn't keep the team competitive long-term. Injuries and mismanagement meant Golden State rarely made the playoffs. 2007 upset of the Mavericks was a bright spot, but it was an exception in a long era of losing. Only the drafting of Stephen Curry and smart front office moves ended this prolonged dark period. Houston Rockets, 2000s. After Hakeem Olajuwon retired and Yao Ming's injuries mounted, the Rockets faced a long period of frustration. From 2004 to 2010, Houston bounced between mediocrity and lottery contention. T-Mac and Yao showed flashes of brilliance, but injuries and inconsistent supporting cast kept the team from playoff success. Poor trades and lack of depth further hindered progress. Fans watched a once-respected franchise crumble, with multiple seasons ending with September 1st. The post-Yao rebuild required years of patience and smart drafting before the Harden era restored hope. LA Clippers pre-2010. The Clippers pre-2010 era is synonymous with dysfunction. Under Donald Sterling, the franchise suffered through decades of losing seasons, terrible management, and a toxic culture. Talented players often left after short stints, unable to thrive in a disorganized environment. Fans endured embarrassment, with the Clippers routinely finishing near the bottom of the Western Conference. This dark era cemented their reputation as the league's perennial punching bag. Only the acquisition of Blake Griffin and the eventual Sterling sale allowed the Clippers to escape decades of irrelevance and finally compete consistently. LA Lakers, early 1990s. After Magic Johnson's first retirement in 1991, the Lakers entered a rough patch. Without Magic and Kareem long gone, the team struggled to find identity. Drafts often failed, trades flopped, and the franchise cycled through coaches with little success. Though players like Vlade Divac or Nick Van Exel showed promise, Los Angeles became a shadow of its Showtime glory. Fans endured years of early playoff exits or missed postseason entirely. This dark era persisted until Shaq and Kobe arrived, restoring dominance. It remains a reminder that even legendary teams can collapse without a superstar or clear direction. Memphis Grizzlies, Vancouver years, 1995 to 2001. Before relocating to Memphis, the Vancouver Grizzlies were a financial and competitive disaster. From 1995 to 2001, the team posted repeated losing seasons, often with fewer than 20 wins. The roster consisted mainly of unproven draft picks and underperforming veterans. Fan interest in Vancouver dwindled, and the franchise faced relocation rumors for years. Players like Bryant Reeves couldn't carry the team, and coaching instability compounded the issues. The relocation to Memphis in 2001 marked the end of the dark Vancouver era and the start of a more stable, competitive identity in Tennessee. Minnesota Timberwolves, Kevin Garnett, 2007 to 2014. After Kevin Garnett left Minnesota in 2007, the Timberwolves became irrelevant overnight. The franchise lacked star power and direction, finishing near the bottom of the Western Conference for years. Young players like Kevin Love showed promise, but injuries, coaching changes, and front office instability hindered development. Draft picks often didn't pan out, and the Wolves became a classic lottery team. Fans endured season after season of disappointment, watching a franchise with past success fade into obscurity. It wasn't until the Karl Anthony Towns era that the Timberwolves finally showed signs of competitiveness again. New Orleans Pelicans, post Chris Paul and Anthony Davis, 2014 to 2019. After Chris Paul and Anthony Davis left, the Pelicans struggled to establish stability. Between 2014 and 2019, New Orleans had poor drafts, frequent coaching changes, and roster turnover. The team constantly flirted with the lottery, but couldn't build a contender. Injuries and inconsistent player development compounded problems. The Pelicans were often overlooked, finishing seasons with sub-.500 records and minimal playoff success. Fans endured frustration, with the franchise's potential wasted repeatedly. Only after smart acquisitions like Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram did hope return, marking the end of this dark stretch. Oklahoma City Thunder / Seattle Supersonics, 2007 to 2008. The late Seattle Supersonics era was turbulent, culminating in relocation to Oklahoma City. Ownership instability, lack of playoff success, and fan unrest defined the team's final seasons. Key players like Ray Allen departed, and prospects failed to develop properly. By 2007, the franchise was fighting to stay relevant in Seattle, and relocation became inevitable. While Oklahoma City would later find success with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, the 2007 to 2008 Supersonics represent one of the most chaotic and disappointing periods in NBA history, ending a proud Seattle basketball tradition. Phoenix Suns, 2010 to 2015. After Steve Nash left in 2012, the Suns entered a dark era of irrelevance. From 2010 to 2015, Phoenix suffered through losing seasons, poor draft picks, and coaching instability. Players like Goran Dragic or Marcin Gortat kept the team afloat, but they were never enough to compete in the Western Conference. Injuries and inconsistent development of young prospects worsened the situation. Fans watched the team plummet from contender status in the mid-2000s to lottery obscurity, and it wasn't until Devin Booker emerged that the Suns finally regained hope and direction. Portland Trailblazers, the early 2000s. Trailblazers became infamous as the Jailblazers due to off-court scandals involving players like Rasheed Wallace, Bonzi Wells, and Damon Stoudemire. Legal issues, partying, and fights overshadowed on-court talent, creating a toxic environment. Despite playoff appearances, the team underperformed, losing credibility with fans and the league. Management struggled to rein in behavior, leading to a long-lasting stain on the franchise's reputation. It took years of drafting responsibly and changing culture before Portland returned to respectability. This era remains one of the most notorious examples of off-court issues destroying a team's potential. Sacramento Kings, 2006 to 2022. The Kings' darkest era was the infamous 16-year playoff drought from 2006 to 2022. After losing Chris Webber and the We Believe team, Sacramento failed to develop talent or make smart trades. Ownership instability, poor coaching, and front office mismanagement compounded the issues. Fans endured decade-long mediocrity, repeated lottery seasons, and an inability to compete in the Western Conference. The franchise became a league-wide joke, despite occasional bright spots, like DeMarcus Cousins. It wasn't until the late 2000s rebuild that the Kings started showing signs of life, finally ending a historically bleak stretch. San Antonio Spurs. Before Tim Duncan arrived, the Spurs struggled in the 1980s, despite George Gervin's scoring feats. They were inconsistent playoff performers, frequently eliminated early, and struggled to compete against NBA powerhouses. Ownership and coaching changes prevented stability, and the team lacked the sustained success it would later enjoy under Popovich. While Gervin's individual brilliance shined, San Antonio as a franchise failed to capitalize, marking the decade as a dark, underachieving period before the dynasty era with Duncan and Robinson. Utah Jazz, early 2000s, post Darren Williams. After Darren Williams left Utah in 2011, the Jazz entered a stretch of mediocrity. Without a clear star, the team finished in the middle of the Western Conference, missing deep playoff contention. Draft picks didn't pan out immediately, and coaching changes caused instability. Players like Al Jefferson or Gordon Hayward were solid, but not enough to elevate the team. Utah became a team that fans watched without much hope for championship contention. This era showed the challenges of rebuilding after a star leaves and highlights how quickly a competitive team can slide into irrelevance.